Okay, hello. This is the first episode of Precon Decon. We are going to start things off with the very first Magic the Gathering set that had pre-constructed decks, which was Tempest, which was back in the late 90s. There were 4 decks in this set, and in this one we're going to look at the very first one, which was Deep Freeze. So this is a white-blue deck. Just really want to take a moment to look at that lovely nostalgic box up there. Back then, the Wrath cycle, because that's what we called blocks back then, was cycles. Yep, so Deep Freeze. White blue, you can probably guess what the theme's going to be, but we'll dive into it. So this is the deck list here. So you have 12 creatures, 11 instants, 2 artifacts, 7 enchantments, 4 sorceries, 24 land. We got a mana curve off to the side there, so you can see it peaks around mana value 3. As you can see, you can probably guess what the theme is going to be. It's going to be a lot of controlling and probably winning in the air with flying creatures, because that is classic blue-white, even back in those days. So let's look at some of these cards. So we've got a bunch of flyers. So first off, we have Avenging Angel, which is a really nice 3/3 flyer. If it dies, it goes back on top of your library. One thing I like about this is that it is May. It's not obligatory, just in case there is a chance you lock yourself out by destroying the angel over and over again. This is also one of the deck's rares. What I'll do when I do this retrospective, I'll just do a little asterisk next to the cards which are the rares. So the 3 rares in these Tempest, these Wrath cycle decks. So Avenging Angel, perfectly fine flyer. I think this was meant to be like the signature rare, which is why it's on the box. You have Cloud Chaser Eagle, just a flyer that destroys an enchantment. Lots of enchantments around at this time of the game, just because there weren't really equipment. So things like auras were like a lot more prevalent, and artifacts were usually kind of like rare and bad. So enchantments did a lot of the heavy lifting, really, in terms of like utility and setting kind of game effects. Windrake, I think this is still a fine limited card, just 2/2 flyer for 3. Still fine by these. Sky Spirit also, I think, is actually fine by today's standards. Like 2/2 flying first strike for 3. It's not exciting, but it's okay. It's okay. Then some stuff on the ground. Night of Dawn. I used to think Night of Dawn was pretty good back in the day, just because you can pay to get protection from a card of your choice time to turn. I think I'd rather have like that cost baked in, like if it came into play and you chose a color, and then you had protection from that color. By that point, you're basically looking at a whole new card anyway. Master Decoy, really like Master Decoy. Just 1 white and tap down a creature. It gets a big blocker out of the way, it stops a big attacker. Master Decoy is just great. Probably a little like we don't really see this effect this much these days. If we do, like, it's a lot more expensive, which is fine because it does like slow down a game quite a lot. But back in the day, that's just how it was. Also, just the fact that like creatures were generally like quite a lot smaller anyway. You didn't really get like really big creatures, and if you did, they usually had like some horrible downside. But yeah, Master Decoy is great, and that art is goofy as hell, but I do love it. Horn Turtle, fine, just a blocker. Solitary Lancer is a bit more interesting because we can talk about Shadow, which is one of the mechanics of the Tempest block, or the Wrath cycle, if we're going to keep calling it that. So Shadow basically means he can only block or be blocked by other creatures with Shadow. So against most decks, this just means unblockable and can't be blocked, or unblockable and can't block even. But there was, I suppose there was that was more relevant back then, because you had Shadow was amongst white primarily, I think, and then black and blue had a bit of Shadow, and then red and green had no Shadow, but I think they had some very limited ways of interacting with Shadow. And then I think we saw Shadow come back in Time Spiral, but we'll get to Time Spiral in I don't know, about 100 videos. Solitary Lancer, I think, is pretty good. Like 2/2 first strike when attacking would have meant that, like, because a lot of the shadow creatures were quite small, I don't think really many things could have blocked this and like lived. especially stuff with Shadow, like unless they were buffed up with auras or whatever. But he, I think, generally would have been quite threatening on the attack. And also, like, first strike when attacking is because we see that quite a lot, I think, these days, where maybe like first strike is sometimes conditional. Or we have other keywords that are conditional, like, oh, it has hexproof as long as it's your turn, that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see it here, kind of like quite early in Magic's design. I think I saw a design video from Gavin Verhey where he was saying like, oh, if they were like redoing Magic, they would try and make it so first strike is only when attacking, because it's so good on defense as well. So this is kind of like first strike is intended. I'm aware I talked about first strike and shadow a lot there, but that's it's generally one of the most interesting cards in the deck, because everything else is just kind of like a flyer or a blocker, really. So then we have some instants. So we have Invulnerability, Disenchant, Anoint. Disenchant is fine, we don't need to talk about Disenchant, everyone knows what Disenchant does. Invulnerability and Anoint, though, they're a bit more interesting because they have buyback, which is one of the mechanics of the Wrath cycle. So buyback is base system mechanic, you pay an extra cost when you pay the spell. If you do, then you get it back in your hand. Which is like fine, back in the day when I was like 12 and seeing these cards for the first time, I was like, oh my god, that's amazing, because like you always have this spell. The thing is, like with buyback, by making an effect repeatable, you can't really put it on an effect that's very good, because you don't want to have like this very good effect over and over and over again. I mean, there are exceptions to that. We'll see. Some design mistakes were definitely made in this block regarding buyback. But generally it means you can't put it on too good an effect. Also, it can be kind of boring if you have an effect that is so good that you keep paying for it, because it means you're not spending mana on casting your other spells. Like there is, I don't think in Tempest, I think it's either Stronghold or Exodus, but there's like a fog with buyback, which is it's would be so unfun to play against. Because it just means like, oh, every turn I just fog, but I have it every turn. So I think flashback is definitely like a better way of implementing this kind of way of casting the same spell more than once. But anyway, Vulnerability and Anoint are just damage prevention, which is kind of a weak effect, but I suppose when you put buyback on it, it's kind of okay, I guess. Buttload of Countermagic. It was so weird looking at this set, like how much Countermagic there was in it. Because these days we get maybe like I guess like 2, maybe 3 counter spells in a set, sort of at most. This had, I think, about 6, and this deck's running like 4 of them. So you have 3 counter spell, which is the classic. 2 power sinks, which I didn't understand at all when I was a small child and reading it for the first time. I had no idea what it did, but I think it's pretty good. Dismiss, which is just counterspell with draw a card, which is fine, and Spell Blast, which is just bad. Because in my mind, I think you should be paying less for a counterspell than your opponent's paying for their spell. Spell Blast means you're always paying 1 extra because you have to pay the 1 blue to cast it, and then X, where X is the mana value of the spell you're trying to counter. So I just think Spell Blast is just not very good. Then we have some enchantments. So Gaseous Form, I think Gaseous Form is okay. It has like this nice utility that you can put it on your creatures and it becomes, basically invulnerable. So like on Horned Turtle or like one of the other flyers that can just block kind of forever. Or you put it on an opponent's creature and then it can't do anything either. So, it's kind of janky, but it's okay. Pacifism, we know and love pacifism. Legacy's Allure is the interesting one here. So, what was it? So during your upkeep, you may put a treasure counter on Legacy's Allure, and then sacrifice it, permanently gain control of target creature with power no greater than the number of treasure counters on Legacy's Allure. So dropping this early, I think, would be really, would be pretty strong, because it just builds up, and then you can sack it at instant speed at no cost to like permanently gain control of something, which I think is like, you draw this late on, it's obviously not as good, but I think this is like actually a pretty decent card. I think this is uncommon. I think when they did Tempest Remastered, this got bumped up to rare, but I think it's pretty good. Legacy's Allure. It's kind of janky again, but like it has a janky sort of charm to it. Right, and we have a bit more. Bit more. Well, I was going to say card draw, but repentance is card draw. Well, I was like quickly for repentance. Target creature deals to itself damage equal to its power. That's a perfectly fine white removal spell. Obviously, most of the creatures you want to use that on, like big threatening sort of game-ending creatures, are going to have power that is equal to or greater than their toughness, so that's fine. Let's talk about Precognition, which is one of the other rares. So 5 mana during your upkeep. You look at the top card of target opponent's library. You can put that card on the bottom of their library. So it's basically 5 mana to Fate Seal 1 every turn, which is, I just don't think that's a very strong effect at all. Because it's 5 mana. It does nothing the turn you play it, and you have to wait till next turn, and you get to Fate Seal 1. I mean, I think this would have been fine at like 3 mana, honestly. It sort of plays into the deck's theme of like controlling, I guess. But yeah, I don't think that's very good. There's better options, which I'll be discussing in a bit. And then Dream Cache. This is essentially a fixed brainstorm. It's 3 mana, draw 3 cards, and then 2 cards from your hand on either the top or bottom of the library. So you don't actually get any card advantage from it, because you have to spend obviously 1 card. You spend Dream Cache, so that's 1 card. You draw 3, and then 2 are going back. So really, you like break even. You don't get any card advantage. It's just kind of filtering through. But it is essentially a fixed brainstorm, because brainstorm is obviously very, very good for its cost and what it does. Time Ebb, 1 bounce spell in the entire control deck, which is good. 1 bounce spell. It's an okay bounce spell to put stuff back on top of owner's library. I would have liked to see more copies of this rather than all the Countermagic. But that's the thing with these pre-constructed decks. Obviously, they were built in such a way that like a new player could pick it up and like play it a few times, be like, oh, this isn't working out for me like this. I'll make some changes. And then a couple of artifacts. MSC Tomb, which is 5 tap, draw 2 cards, and then discard a card. That's okay. Again, like at the time, artifacts were usually overcosted because they could go. I guess the thinking was, oh, they can go in any deck, so they should be kind of like subpar as like to compensate that you can go into any deck, I guess, maybe. 5 mana to draw 2 and then discard is, I mean, it's. I think this would be like, if this showed up today, I think it would be like like an uncommon. And even then, I think it would be cheaper. But I say at the time, this was basically okay. And then Puppet Strings, on the other hand, I think is really good. It's not as good as Icy Manipulator, but it does get to untap stuff. So I think Puppet Strings is okay. Again, fits into the theme of like tapping stuff down, or you could swing with something and then untapping and give it sort of vigilance. Not ideal, but it's okay. So this is a little section I'm going to do for each of these decks is what could have been, and this is just like my kind of ideas on like what cards could have been either added in either to the initial deck list, or if I was playing the deck and I could like upgrade it with cards I wanted, this is like what I would have put in. So I think Morcor could have gone in. So Morcor's just like a big it's like it's not a big flyer, it's a 3/3 flyer, and it has a ping ability which will definitely seem weird to new players. Blue used to have direct damage, which is super weird. Makes no sense why it did. It just did. But yeah, Morcor's just a big 3/3 flyer. Again, it's not a big flyer. Why? I don't know why I keep saying it's a big flyer. 3/3 is not a big flyer. Flickering Ward is a aura that gives protection from a chosen color. Propaganda is like this classic like prison enchantment where you can't be attacked unless they pay 2 for the attacking creatures. Staunch Defender is just a big fat guy who gives you some health, would be okay on the ground as a blocker, while flying creatures basically give you the win. And then Capsize, this is the probably most infamous buyback spell, or one of the most infamous ones, where it's a bounce spell with buyback, and it's target permanent. It's not non-land permanent or creature, it is any permanent back to hand, and it has buyback. Basically, once you hit 6 mana, that's what you're doing every turn. It's just capsizing something every turn. And I love Capsize, but my god, it would be so miserable to play against if that became the game of just bouncing something every turn. But Capsize is great, really iconic card from the block. So in summary, I think Deep Freeze is actually pretty good. There's a few like dead cards in there. I say like Precognition is not great. Um, but like for the time, like with the card pool available, which was like fairly limited, I think this would have been like pretty good. It's a lot of counter magic, which counter magic is like quite um it's not a what am I trying to say? Counter magic is it's a difficult concept to teach like new players because you have to be aware of like how game tempo works and like when to correctly respond to threats, like when to hold on to your mana to like hold stuff to like hold cards to counter enemy spells. So it would have been kind of like a high skill deck to play, I think. But overall, I think it's pretty strong. Yeah, I would have been quite happy to sort of play this out the box. I think it would have done fine against all the others in the set, which I say we'll be looking at in future videos. But yeah, what do you think about Deep Freeze? Did you have this deck? Did you ever play it? Do you like the look of it? Would you have not enjoyed playing against it? I don't know. Leave a comment below. Let's start a conversation about about a deck that's like 25 years old at this point. But yeah, cool. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, I will be back next time with another Tempest block precon.